I will be the moderator for this evening's webinar. Right, now the pandemic is into its third year. Countless lives and livelihoods have been lost, education disrupted, and an unhappy public is seeking answers. Now, we are not here to debunk or promote any theory. We are here to examine objectively and dispassionately and with disinterest all the evidence before us. So today we have got two very distinguished panelists to help us find some answers. We first have Dr. Koshy Philip, an eminent scientist with impeccable credentials who has worked in prestigious labs around the world and is currently with University Malaya as full-time faculty from 2004. Prior to that, he started clinical trials in the faculty since 1996. He's currently a research associate with IEOS University Malaya and the High Impact Research Lab. Dr. Shankara Chetty, he has the academic credentials I wish I had. He has degrees in microbiology, genetics, biochemistry, and advanced biology other than his medical degree. A perfect combination of clinician and scientist. His day job is as a frontline physician from Port Edward, South Africa. So now let's look at the questions that have been sent to us. I've put them in logical order. So for the virus itself, now is this a natural virus or is this an artificial lab-created virus? Now, if it's a natural virus, did the infection occur from animal to man naturally, or did it come via a lab? So now we've got three possible scenarios here. Now, did it leak from a lab? Now, as a lab medicine physician, I can tell you that lab leaks are always of a concern to us. There's a Wikipedia page with a whole list of lab leak incidents, and it looks like smallpox does escape from time to time, right? Now, then was the leak intentional or unintentional? And
Dr. Manimalar, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
I have to start all over again, huh? Okay.
Just the last sentence or two, that's all.
Okay. Has the virus, okay, and where and when did the infection really start? Now, the hot ticket question is, has the virus really been cultured and isolated? And I think here, there seems to be different interpretations to the word isolate, right? And are the variants natural or are the variants also artificial viruses? Now, of course, today's top question topic is this a bioweapon? Yes, we can ask who would be willing to injure their fellow humans on such a large scale. Well, we have had the US drop atomic bombs on civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We have seen humans place bombs on the Pan Am jetliner, which exploded over Lockerbie, killing those on board as well as passers-by on the ground. So as a histopathologist, I can confirm that malignant behavior is alive and well around us. So every theory is on the table, ready to be examined tonight. Now, as for the vaccine, the top question seemed to be, now if we could formulate a vaccine within 6 months, it took us only 6 months to come up with a vaccine for the original strain. So why is it taking us so long to come up with newer vaccines for the newer strains? The second question is, why not use old technology of just injecting the spike protein into us rather than a convoluted mRNA vax technology in which many factors are not known or controllable? The third question is, why have we not made AEFI reporting mandatory? Now, it's illogical not to have a mandatory system because without it, we cannot count all AEFI or even track rare AEFI. Now, one question which sort of bugs the public is the fact that if a young, healthy person gets a COVID infection and dies from it or has long-term consequences, we have no difficulty in saying that this the person died of COVID or the causation. But if a young and healthy person after a vaccination dies after a vaccination, shortly after a vaccination, or develops morbidity, we somehow are hesitant to say that the vaccine caused it. So to the general public, this sort of dual, what shall I say, treatment of the infection and the vaccine doesn't make sense. In fact, it doesn't make much sense to me as well. So these are some of the questions, and let's see how many of these questions can be answered by our distinguished panel. With that, I will invite Dr. Koshy to start.
Thank you, Dr. Manimalar. Let me share my screen now. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible, yes.
Okay, let me go to screenshot. Okay, I will present an overview and run through some fundamentals of what is bioterrorism. Are these threats real? What does it take to perhaps detect them? And what are some take-home messages from a simple layman's perspective? So I'll speak as a bioscientist trained from a microbiological perspective. Now let's look at what use for biological weapons. How did this come about? And then I'll go through a little bit of the background of what bioweapons are and where did it begin. So let me begin with the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1919. Bear in mind, bioweapons are not battlefield weapons. While living things, or especially living pathogens, take time to incubate, but in the period before engagement, it does make sense to eliminate combat readiness, destroy public morale, and harm economies. And we know pretty well, during the Spanish flu, some 50 million died, and it did more damage to the global economy than the First World War. And for economic aggression, food supplies or strategic capabilities can be targeted. For example, a bacterium, a simple bacterium, can be developed specifically to attack lubricating oil, even used in a weapons platform. Let's look at the basic fundamentals of a bioweapon. What is it? What does it contain? It has three components. There is a biological agent, which is capable of inflicting some adverse impact, be it on a human target or an animal target, or even a plant, agriculture, food source target. The second component is it should have some additives to support the stability and dissemination of this agent. And the third component is it must have an effective delivery system. Now, biowarfare did not start recently. If you look at history, and it has been reported in peer-reviewed journals that perhaps the first biowarfare was seen sometime in the 14th century BC. And the rams were basically used to infect enemies or enemy targets with tularemia. And we got, as you can see in this table, a whole list of events that took place over the centuries. We had the Mongols hurling bodies of plague victims over the walls of a besieged city in Crimea. We have, in the era of the 15th century, where the Lithuanian army has hurled manure made of infected victims into the town of Karlstein. And so we have many of these events, mixing of wine with blood of leprosy patients, using it against the foes, using saliva from rabid dogs, and targeting enemies. In 1710, the Russian army catapulted plague cadavers over Swedish troops in Estonia. And in 1763, the British distributed blankets from smallpox hospitals to the Native Americans. So we have all these events that had taken place in history. Just shows the vicious nature of the humankind and to what extent they can descend to inflict damage on their enemies. Now, more recently in the First World War, the British had planned to use anthrax to damage German army transport, because at that point in time, they depended on horses. The horses became a good target. It is interesting to recall an incident in the years from 69 to 71. You have heard of the Southern Corn Blight, which was an outbreak which destroyed some 15% of the US maize crop. And this was the result of some natural mutation of an unprecedented impact. It could be natural mutation, but of course, it had an unprecedented impact. And in post-reunification Germany, support research was done to biodegrade plastics, because they had this whole pile of East German motor vehicles which posed an ecological threat, and therefore they had to deal with it. And microbes were a good tool. Now, there are some past unresolved events. In the 1970s, this is during the Vietnam War, allegations were made. Planes and helicopters delivered aerosols, and these were marked by colors. And this was used to attack inhabitants of Laos and Cambodia. This was an allegation, remember. And people were exposed, got disoriented and ill. And these attacks were described as the yellow rain. In fact, it was highly controversial whether these clouds truly represented biological warfare agents. But some of these clouds were believed to comprise trichothecene toxins. And this is a fungal origin mycotoxin. And some scientists also is of the school of thought that these yellow rains were mostly fecal matter from wild honeybees dropped during their cleansing flights. So the controversy over the yellow rain incidents remains unresolved. So there you have an idea of how it is difficult to prove some of these events and incidents. More recently, we had the Gulf War in 1990. And what happened during the Operation Desert Shield? There was a build-up phase during the Gulf War. And after Iraq had invaded and occupied Kuwait, and then the US and the coalition of allied countries, they knew there was the possible threat of biological and chemical warfare. And that was something that had to be prepared. The experience gained from even previous observations of the first Gulf War in the late 80s supported information that biological and chemical weapons were indeed available. And this was known to the Western intelligence community. In fact, Iraq had used chemical warfare, and that is obvious from media reports. And intelligence reports from that time suggested that the regime had sponsored a very ambitious biological and chemical warfare programs, and evidence do point in that direction. So what did the coalition forces do? They had to be prepared for this potential risk, and they had to be trained with protective masks and equipment. They had to exercise decontamination procedures. They had to receive extensive education on possible detection procedures. I'll talk a little bit more about detection procedures later, and how troops had to be immunized against potential biowarfare threats. Approximately some 150,000 US troops received a FDA licensed toxoid vaccine against anthrax, and 8,000 received then new botulinum toxoid vaccine. And for further protection against anthrax spores, 30,500,000 milligram oral doses of ciprofloxacin was stockpiled to provide a 1-month course of chemoprophylaxis for some 500,000 US troops that was involved in the operation. More recent, in 2001, this is again unidentified culprits. Some 5 persons are thought to have died from deliberate contamination with anthrax. Of course, during the same period, we have 20 million people dying from AIDS and other related diseases. And there are natural infections probably killing 100 million worldwide. And there are many diseases with or from unrecognized infections, cancers caused by viruses, heart disease caused by a bacteria like chlamydia pneumonia. The question remains, how real today are biological threats from the misuse of microorganisms? And I'll try my best to answer this question. The main concern is the duality of use. And this is something fundamental. What does that mean? Beneficial or harmful uses of some of these microbes and tools available. For instance, let's take one example of the desirable biodegradation of petrochemical spills. This is one of the first patents awarded for biological patents, right? And General Electric had a patent on a microbe which was designed to deal with petrochemical spills. Now, the question is, should we ban research into oil-eating microbes just because it can be used for some misuse or abuse, as I pointed out in the earlier part of my talk? The question continues to be perplexing. Beneficial versus harmful. Where do we strike the balance? And how do we know what is exactly happening? So the concerns about biological weapons and dual use, and this fear of deliberately aimed bioweapons, arguably creating a useful capacity, perhaps to react to the next virus. And so you have new R&D into pathogens, new vaccine production going on, its capability, reinforced epidemiological surveillance, targeted at bioweapons use. And so there is a direct and positive effect on civil and military readiness for bioterror or Mother Nature's next aberration. Now, let's look at the convention. What regulation has been put in place by the international community? So you have the Bioweapons Convention, and this has been developed, and most have honored this commitment. But this is called the Bioterror Weapons Convention, and there is still a country like USSR, or not even recognizing and in breach conspicuously. But the fact remains that all G7 nations have a capacity for dual use potential and can move from vaccine production into weapons production in just a matter of days. So the risk and threat, the tools of modern biology, susceptible to misuse, no doubt about it. And this is also true for any technologies. A vehicle can be misused, a kitchen knife can be misused, any object can be used as a weapon. So with modern biology, a risk of abuse exists. But is it true to suggest that this risk translates into threat? And that is to say, a real and present danger. So preparedness can be the key, should seek to identify, to translate the risk into a threat. A simple question that we can address, when does a kitchen knife become a weapon? Or when does a fermenter or bioreactor become a weapon-producing tool? It is obvious during the Gulf War that the regime had these bioreactors mounted on huge trailers, which could be mobilized and moved around without any detection. And it was very easy to move it across the borders. And it is suspected or thought to have disappeared as the bombing reached the capital of Iraq. And where has it landed up? In some rogue hands? Nobody knows. Evidence is so easy to vanish. So the dangers from dual use is obvious. The potential is everywhere. However, the risk in the area of modern biology is contained through institutional biosafety and biosecurity standard operating procedures. So every institution, every research lab have this. And these are in place, and yet cultures are developed for research purpose with good intention, but is there the possibility of bad intention or rogue use? The naturally emerging next virus can be deadly, and industry has a capability, but with little incentive to be prepared in terms of dual use issues, and that is a constraint. So the sensible application of the BTWC protocol that we were talking about, the convention, coupled with minor reinforcement of existing regulatory regimes, could avoid this dual abuse. So these are all possible solutions to a problem that is nagging the world. So dual use dilemmas, what is the key problem? Dual use of the know-how and equipment that is involved in civilian research and can also be used in biodefense projects and potential offensive biowarfare projects. It's difficult to draw the line between what is offensive and defensive in terms of research. And in the course of many biodefense projects, an offensive capability is generated, and this can often be misused in the hands of irrational organizations or institutions. Now let's look at one perfect example of how anthrax was used as, I would term it, as an invisible bioweapon. In the 1990s, researchers succeeded in altering the immunological properties of anthrax and making existing weapons and the detection methods ineffective against newly genetically engineered types. We'll talk about genetic modification in a short while. And so we had Russian researchers who developed a new vaccine that is effective against the artificial strain. And following the Russians, what was responded by the US Department of Defense then was reported to have genetically engineered an anthrax to test if the Russian microbe can indeed defeat the US anthrax vaccine. So these kind of work, this kind of research continues. And in the course of such work, where does it progress and where does it lead us? These are issues that we need to consider and to face in the future. Now, biological weapons have been and remain until today a very plausible threat, with numerous mentioned cases of use, as I mentioned earlier, in history. And with the spread of terrorism in some regions of the world and in some unstable countries which are suspected to have continued developing biological warfare programs, anything is possible. The threat posed by bioweapons is becoming more and more pressing, right? And it is real. Furthermore, if biological weapons are weapons of mass destruction, and that means they have an objective of causing public panic, leading to social disruption, and eventually mass destruction. So one of the most recent cases demonstrating this probability is the incident of anthrax letters in 2001 in the US, when letters full of anthrax bioagent were specifically sent to US politicians and journalists. This has been reported in the media, and this is something which is known. Now, what is the challenge? The biggest problem is when such an incident occurs, how do we detect? The challenge basically remains to the problem of detection. And how do we detect this kind of exposure into the environment? Ideally, detection platforms should be capable of rapidly detecting and confirming biothreat agents, including modified or previously uncharacterized agents, directly from complex samples with no false results. But that is ideal situation. And the instrument should be portable, it should be user-friendly and capable of testing many agents at the same time, simultaneously. Now, several detection platforms exhibit many of these characteristics, but no one system satisfies all of the criteria. So commercial detection and identification of biological threat agents is definitely a concern. There are numerous methods for detection and identification of human pathogens, and these were used for more than a century and are supposedly well established and well understood. Now, these methods rely on cultivation, biochemical assays, and that can take from 24 hours to a month to perform in the hands of a well-trained clinical technician. Now, while these methods are reliable, they generally cannot be used in the field or are not capable of providing real-time or nearly real-time detection and identification of a biothreat agent in the event of a bioterrorist act. And with recent bioterrorism incidences, there is the critical need to develop more accurate, rapid methods to detect and identify these kind of agents so that it can be contained and it can be neutralized. Now, moving on, there is the new technology which we all know as CRISPR, and the acronym CRISPR, which basically, and I'm just giving a short overview of what gene editing can do in terms of adding to the complexity of the problem. Now, CRISPR technology basically stands for clusters of regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. And basically, it's a region of DNA that comprises of short repeated sequences with spaces that is sandwiched between each repeat. Now, when the components of CRISPR is transferred into a more complex organisms, these components can actually manipulate the genes. And this is what gene editing is all about. And no one really knew this process until 2017. when there was this team of researchers from Kanazawa University and from the University of Tokyo. For the first time, they showed what it looks like when a CRISPR is in action. So basically, what is CRISPR? It is just a set of molecular scissors. It has come to that kind of simplicity, and that can change the world. It is an enzyme that can cut the DNA, and scientists figured out in 2012 that they could deploy it for cheap, effective gene editing, and it started there. And you just have to tag the CRISPR molecule with a bit of RNA, and it will guide and cut and rewrite the entire snippet of the DNA. So just see how simplified it is to do a gene editing. So microbes have genes, constitute genes, and it can be easily edited. So the steps in gene editing is simple, and it's just a way of finding a specific bit of the DNA within the cell. And with gene editing, you can alter any piece of DNA, and this has been adapted to do other things too, like turning genes on or off without altering their sequence. So this is 2017, just a 5-year-old technology. And there were ways to edit the genomes, even of plants and animals, even before CRISPR was unveiled. But it took years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And today with CRISPR, it has been made cheap and easy. So you have this group which has brought it this far, and that's the timeline from the discovery. And today you have gene editing that can be done even in mammalian cells, not just microbial cells. They've moved on, they've progressed. And so you have international scientists who have made some breakthroughs here, and it is something that can be used for either beneficial or harmful applications. So you have a molecular tool, and you have a simple scissor-like technology which can take this to the next level of manipulation indeed. So the potential risks and ethical concerns remain with CRISPR. And these potential applications, let me just raise some questions about its merits and consequences of tampering with the genomes. You know, these debates actually became a reality in 2018 when one of these scientists involved with this technology, a biophysicist, and he announced that his team had edited DNA in human embryos and created the first gene-edited babies. Of course, that is unethical, and he was legally penalized for what he did. So you have more potential in terms of microbial gene editing, where these clustered, regularly interspaced repeats and its associated proteins can be a method of choice for precision genome engineering in any organisms. And so you can adopt it for implementation for RNA-guided genome editing with special emphasis on metabolic engineering in yeast and bacteria. So herein lies the danger with the ease of designing a dangerous microbial agent. So this gives you an overview of the range of applications from human gene therapy to applications in agriculture with crops and animals. You can screen it for drug target ID. You can use it for pathway engineering. You can program RNA targeting, and you can also use it for vector control. But there is also the possibility of it being used for viral gene disruption and pathogen gene disruption. So the whole range of possibilities exist, beneficial versus harmful. So the take-home message that I'm going to perhaps summarize here is biological weapons are unique in their invisibility and their delayed effects. And these factors allow those who use them to inculcate fear and cause confusion among their victims and escape undetected. So a biowarfare attack would not only cause sickness and death in a large number of victims, but can also aim to create fear, panic, and paralyzing uncertainty. So what is the goal? Disrupt social and economic activity, break down government authority, and impairment of military responses. As demonstrated by the anthrax letters after the World Trade Center attack in September 2001, the occurrence of only a small number of infections can create an enormous psychological impact, where everyone can feel threatened and nobody knows what will happen next. So some preventive steps can be taken. Primary prevention, creating a strong global norm that rejects such development of weapons. Secondary prevention that implies early detection and prompt treatment of the disease. And so the medical community is faced with an important role in secondary prevention by participating in disease surveillance and reporting, and thus providing a first indication of any bioweapons use. So with that, I will leave it to the audience and the listeners to understand that these threats are real, and therefore we have to be concerned. And I shall be open to some questions now.
Dr. Manimalar, you got to unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I have. Thank you. Prof, that was an excellent talk. And
Thank you.
I learned that bioterrorism is an industry which is alive and well. Now, some of the features that you mentioned, such as, what do you call it, a feature of bioterrorism, will also fit in like what we see in the pandemic. It's very large scale, so much of confusion, and a lot of, what shall I say, things which don't seem to add up. But having said that, we must make sure that we have unimpeachable proof before making these claims of bioterrorism and things like that. So the two major strands for this idea that C-19 could be it's a bioterrorist attack, is one, there seems to be some talk that there was some clandestine gain of function test funded by the US in the Wuhan lab in China. And also there was some participation or initial participation by scientists from US. So that is one strand which seems to be going on. The second strand is the level of safety of the Wuhan lab itself. Now, we all know those, we being lab medicine doctors, we know that initially when a lab is built, money is poured into it. So the infrastructure is great, the training given is great. And so the lab runs well for a few years, but then eventually the yearly budget to upkeep the lab, upkeep the training, upkeep certification may not be enough, and then the lab starts slipping. So have you, I'm sure like since our talk yesterday also, maybe we have gone and looked at it. Is there anything that you can tell us about, what shall I say, gain of function research? You were mentioning some that during President Obama's time there was a halt put to it. So maybe we can tell the audience what we know so far, the connection between gain of function research and the current COVID-19 epidemic.
Okay. When the virus first came on the scene, it was all linked to the zoonosis. And of course, there was a lot of speculation, and World Health Organization did embark on investigation. But until today, there is no real proof of such a gene of function research as being attributed to the creation of the virus. Now, what we can recall is in 2014, there was a moratorium which was enforced by the Obama administration to seize or stop all gain of function research. Of course, gain of function research was done, as I said, that anthrax example is one of them. They test it, between vaccine and to look at efficacy and that sort of thing, for public health interest. But in 2014, for whatever reason, Obama had enforced a moratorium. That means no gain of function research. The next issue or question that we need to address is, could it be a lab accident? Because every labs keep cultures because they have to do research, they have to investigate. And these cultures are supposed to be contained in very high security, strong rooms with all the precautions and procedures in place. And that sometimes is often compromised. Every institution has an institutional biosafety system. It has got, in addition, institutional biosecurity system. Now that is supposed to contain the cultures. But despite that, things can go wrong. We cannot rule out the possibility of things going wrong. But if you read through media, there was one report that is significant. That is, as you said, labs, when they are first set up, a lot of capital, capex, capital expenditure goes into it. And then after that, there is the OPEX, operating expenditure, to maintain it. But some red flags were raised when there was these collaborations going on and visiting scientists were exchanging visits. There was some concern of not stringent enough measures in place in Wuhan. But of course, WHO had come back and they had, investigated it, I think that was last year, and nothing conclusive. So that is where we remain at the moment. So that is as far as the evidence published is available. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much. We will continue with our questions later, but for now, can we call the next speaker, Dr. Shankara Chetty?
Hi, Dr. Manimalar. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Doctor.
Hi, welcome everyone to our audience for this evening. Good morning and good afternoon to the rest of the world. I think my discussion today is going to center around my observations through the pandemic itself, the consistencies and inconsistencies in both the infection and our response to that infection, so that we can give some understanding as to whether this was intentional or not. I think a lot of the evidence that we'll have would be insubstantial, but can be substantiated. So I think it's important to understand the journey we've been on to try and understand what's actually going on. To start with, I think it's important to understand what wars are about, be them regional or world wars. They have been tools for an elite to actually reset society. So the First and Second World Wars caused a great reset of society as we knew it at that time. First of all, these wars have very high mortality. And whether it's intentional or not, a lot of people die during these wars. The second thing that happens with world wars is that there is a change in the social structure. Privileges and prejudices get dispensed differently. Individual rights are affected. People are enslaved. Poverty ensues. The next thing that changes with wars is the financial system and the economies of countries, dependent on who comes out on top, and of course the reasons behind those wars being fought. Politics also changes with world wars, and this causes a reset in the political scenario in different countries. And of course, that leads to a change in the way we educate and the way those wars are actually documented. Now, from the understanding of world wars, I think it's important next to look at the weapons used in those wars. Initially, weapons were one-on-one, they were single artillery, and they caused people to die. However, as wars progressed, the weapons became more destructive and, of course, more indiscriminate, and they killed en masse and, of course, destroyed infrastructure. However, these weapons could not be easily controlled or confined. Like an atomic bomb, it will kill indiscriminately. So this is where the promise of a bioweapon came in. And this was something that started in the 1970s, 1980s, with serious investigations into bioweaponry. Bioweapons hold the potential of being very discriminate in how they kill. And of course, they pose no risk to damage of infrastructure. Now, to put that into context, it is quite simple, as the previous speaker has alluded to create a pathogen for which there is no cure. And of course, with the development of such a pathogen, you can as well develop the antidote or a vaccine for it. And so you could vaccinate the part of the population that you don't want to be affected and then release the pathogen. That pathogen would discriminately kill all people that don't have the antidote or are unvaccinated. And so this provides a very discriminate war tool. It has the ability to kill those you wish to kill and to protect those that you wish to protect. So this is the new age of war, the new age of weaponry. And so it's vitally important to understand that bioweapons pose a serious new threat to humanity and a silent threat to humanity. We don't hear the sounds of firearms, we don't see death. It happens quietly in your bed at night. Now, to understand whether this pandemic or COVID or coronavirus is actually a bioweapon, I think we need to understand the virus or the pathogen and the vaccine. And there's a possibility that one or both are actually a bioweapon, and both work in different ways. So I think we should deal with them separately. The virus itself, or the pathogen for COVID illness, has not been identified, has not been isolated. We've used a sequence from China to develop all the different testing that we've done. All the different investigations that we've done have come from a sequence that was isolated from a patient and never verified. So we have yet to verify a virus. And that's the first most important thing that needs to get done. With the pandemic raging on for over 2 years, it seems very strange that we haven't yet been able to isolate the causative pathogen. From the illness that this pathogen causes, we're aware of the transition on the 8th day and the sudden worsening of illness. So we have almost an explosion on the 8th day that causes a change in the symptomatology of the disease. That kind of reaction can only occur due to a severe hypersensitivity or a poisoning toxin. And these are the kind of sudden cascading reactions that occur in the body. Very few other pathogens cause that kind of a reaction. They tend to be progressive. Now, with the virus itself, or the pathogen, we've realized that spike protein is the primary pathogen of COVID illness. And that is what causes this 8th day worsening, and those people susceptible are the ones at highest risk of mortality and morbidity. Now, when you look at spike protein spike protein is a very toxic protein. Now, spike protein came to the fore from the understanding that a bat coronavirus jumps species to a human being, and the spike protein is the receptor that binds to the host itself. So from the start of the pandemic, my eyes were on spike protein, being something new on this virus. Of course, I was well aware of 20 years of research that went into gain of function, coronavirus research, and spike protein research, and it seemed pretty strange with all this research into spike protein and coronaviruses that we were suddenly faced with the pandemic, where these two things, spike protein and coronavirus, were on top of the list. Now, with spike protein, we've investigated and understood its toxicities. And from the toxicity of spike protein, we've seen that it can trigger a hypersensitivity reaction when a person's infected. We've also seen with spike protein that it has GP120 in it, a protein that seemingly has been patented by Dr. Fauci. GP120 is something found in HIV, and it's known to cause immunosuppression. When this came to the fore, the reasons for the incorporation of GP120 into spike with the vaccine was said to be to prevent the body damaging the messenger RNA in the vaccine. So immunosuppression with GP120. We also know that spike protein can cause endothelial injuries and clots, heart attacks, myocarditis. We know that spike protein has proteins in it that resemble prions, misfolded proteins that are pathogenic and are implicated in Alzheimer's and dementia and the like. We also know that spike protein can enter the nucleus of a cell and damage the BRCA protein, which is vital in repairing double-stranded DNA breaks. So clearly, spike protein, which is found on this virus, is clearly toxic. It is definitely a toxin. And of course, to have a spike protein which such broad pathogenic activity on a virus is unlikely to be a conspiracy of nature. This proves that this was made in a lab. This is something that could not have come together in all this diversity through natural selection alone. The next thing we noticed in the infection itself was bacteriophage activity to the pathogen itself, or the virus. Carlo Brogna in Italy looked at stool and urine samples, and he found that the virus, coronavirus, can actually infect the bacteria in your gut. So it has bacteriophage activity. That means that this virus can infect a human host and can have a bacterial host. Now, we've seen other mammalian target hosts. So this virus seems to have the broadest range of hosts that it can infect, which is not natural, or which is not common in nature. With the bacteriophage activity that Carlo Brogna elucidated, he also found that there were toxins being produced in the stool samples of these infected patients. Now, in those stool samples, they looked at the types of toxins being produced, and they found pphospholipases, a whole range of phospholipases, and when closely looked at, it resembled 15 odd different snake venoms, which is unlikely for a virus to have been able to transmit. They also found alpha conotoxins, which are sea snail poisons. Sea snails tend to paralyze their prey, and the poison that they produce is highly neurotoxic. And then they found metalloproteases, another kind of a toxin. So these toxins that are found in the gut of patients infected with COVID are definitely being made by viral bacterial interaction. Now, with further examination of this, The original note of the virus from Wuhan, the researchers there also found positive PCR rectal swabs. And this was in the initial days of the pandemic. Now, with finding PCR positive rectal swabs, it is clear that the virus is in the gut itself. But this fact was ignored completely. We never considered a fecal-oral route of spread, even though we had a virus in the gut. We only considered it to be a respiratory virus. Subsequently, we found it in sewage. And of course, sewage was being used to test viral activity in different populations. Now, if it was found in sewage, the natural question would be, why aren't we looking at where that sewage came from? And why aren't we understanding how this pathogen transmits itself? Now, to find those kind of toxins in the stool of an infected person is very unusual, especially noting the diversity of the toxins that were found. If we found one or two toxins, we could understand that the bacteriophage, when infecting a bacteria, cause the production of a certain toxin. But this diversity of toxin is very unusual. And of course, research needs to go into whether the different bacteria would produce different toxins. So the toxicity of an individual will be dependent on their pre-existing microbiome. And when infected with COVID, dependent on that microbiome, would produce different toxins. So something very well engineered. If you looked at a virus, at this virus as a bioweapon, it can cause hypersensitivity in its host. It can cause a lot of other issues. And of course, it can cause toxicity and a long-term toxicity. With Carlo's work, when the nasal PCR became negative, the rectal PCR remained positive for sometimes for 7 months after the nasal PCR had turned negative. So this virus is actually living in the gut of people that have recovered from COVID, and it is producing toxin. So that's the second mechanism of a slow poisoning over time. The next thing I'd like to discuss is the vaccine. Now, the vaccines are very controversial. First of all, with my work with coronavirus and the treatment of the illness itself, it became abundantly clear that early treatment could negate all the mortality and morbidity of COVID illness. So that drew the question, why the need for a vaccine if we could curb the mortality and morbidity itself? This was very disingenuous. The early treatment protocols were banned. People were derided for attempting to treat. There was a lot of controversy around early treatment. Now, with the vaccine, it was very early on punted as our savior. And the vaccine itself, being messenger RNA, was new technology. Now, I think there are a few questions that need to be asked around the vaccine itself. First of all, we were using messenger RNA technology, a new technology that was never used in this to produce a vaccine previously. So we took new technology and rushed off to make a vaccine. Of course, we punted it as our savior without knowing whether it was going to be safe or effective. But there are a lot of articles and research that's shown that companies like Moderna were already in the process of manufacturing this vaccine even before the virus became evident. And so I think there's something at play there. With the messenger RNA itself, the messenger RNA, the whole understanding around the vaccine is that you get injected with a piece of messenger RNA that codes for spike protein. This messenger RNA then takes over your cell machinery and gets your cells to make spike protein. Your body then recognizes the spike protein as foreign, and because it recognizes it as foreign, it will develop antibodies to that spike protein. And that is what we want. We want antibodies to spike protein. If those antibodies prove to be neutralizing, when we are faced with the virus with the same spike protein, then those neutralizing antibodies will help destroy that virus. And that is the rationale behind the development of this messenger RNA vaccine. However, messenger RNA is a pretty unstable substance. So we needed a minus 90-degree Pfizer fridge. Yet we vaccinated in open-air football stadiums in the blazing heat. But of course, we needed a minus 90-degree Pfizer fridge. Then, of course, there's all the problems that come in with the technology itself being injected into people. We were not sure how much of RNA was actually active. We weren't sure about its biodistribution in the body itself. We weren't sure how long this messenger RNA would persist in the human body. And so the GP120 protein on spike protein to try and prolong its effect by suppressing our innate immune response to it. We weren't sure as well whether this messenger RNA might have the potential to integrate into our DNA by reverse transcribing into it. And so there were all these inconsistencies and there were all these unknowns that we had to deal with. Of course, the messenger RNA would then make spike protein, and that's the second problem. We're not sure how long it would make spike protein, we're not sure how much of spike protein it would make, and we're not sure how long that spike protein would persist. So there's all these little nuances that make the messenger RNA vaccine difficult. However, if the end result was antibodies to spike protein, it would be pragmatic and very simple to manufacture spike protein and use spike protein as a protein-based vaccine. If people were injected directly with spike protein, then we could gauge the dose perfectly. It would not require such stringent storage and transport mechanisms. And of course, the body would recognize that spike protein as foreign and would develop antibodies to it. So the outcome would be the same, antibodies to spike protein. So that begs the question, why the need for messenger RNA if spike protein could have sufficed and could have been easily manufactured? I think that's a question that needs to be answered. Then, with the vaccines, we took 6 months using new technology to rush through a new vaccine. A great achievement the whole world applauded. I guess it was the fear. But in 2 years of utilizing this vaccine, we've not been able to update it. We've seen the variants change. We've seen the vaccine being ineffective against new variants, yet we've done nothing to make it more effective. Now, if we could design from a new technology a vaccine in 6 months, surely a little tweak here and there to make it a little more effective is not out of reach. So, it begs a few questions. It's almost like we needed transport. And so we applauded because it took us 6 months to design a car. And in 2 years, this car has stood still with a flat tire. And we couldn't figure out how to change that tire. That doesn't make sense. Begs the question, was this car ever meant to transport us anywhere, or does it have a different agenda? So I think the vaccines need to be called into question. They are the wrong technology for the wrong kind of illness, and they're going to have long-term implications. The vaccines itself produce spike protein. We're well aware of the toxicity of spike protein, and we're well aware that the spike protein is going to cause illness. So we are forcing a toxin onto broader society. There is no two ways to look at that. It is toxic, it hasn't shown benefit, we are aware of its risk, yet we choose to mandate it for society itself. Now, I think whether this was, we are sure that this was made in a lab. Nature doesn't conspire in this way. Whether this was an intentional release or not needs to be looked into. Now, I think the response to the pandemic will give us an indication of intention. If this was a mistake, yes, a lab-made virus that mistakenly got out, then I think everyone would have been running around trying to solve the problem. And so we got to look at the intention behind the public response and whether that intention was actually to curb the spread of this virus, or did it have some other intentions? Now, when we look at the response, the first thing that came out was the PCR test. And the PCR test was meant to find the virus. And of course, in trying to find this virus, we wanted to isolate it and prevent it from spreading. Now, the PCR test was based on a sequence got from China. And of course, that sequence was never matched to an isolate. And so this PCR test was designed to look for a piece of the virus. And if that piece was present, the test would be positive. PCR test itself, it amplifies whatever it's looking for. And those are the cycles that they talk about. If you use too many cycles, then of course you'll find anything. The problem is that as you replicate your initial isolate more and more, it would change. And so even if the sequence for COVID was not present in an isolate, the more you replicate it, the more chance you'll have of finding it there. So the PCR test was never meant to diagnose this illness, yet the bodies that be, the governance structures that be, put it out there that we could use it to diagnose COVID. They also put out that there's asymptomatic spread, which was never heard of before. And of course, that made us fearful of every person around us, not only those that were coughing. So the PCR test was there to raise numbers, feed into all the hype, and it created unnecessary panic. Now that goes against a lab leak that we're trying to quietly contain. Now the PCR test was used to institute other measures like masking and lockdowns and travel restrictions and the such. Now, there's controversy with all those topics. Masking was never proved to be beneficial at all. We know it can be dangerous if used for prolonged periods. We are aware of the science. The pores between the fabric of the mask is larger than the size of the viral particle itself. So it's putting a chain link fence around your house, hoping to protect yourself against mosquitoes, yet a false sense of security. The lockdowns itself were meant to curb the spread of this pathogen. That was never going to happen, especially with the PCR test that was not very definitive in the way it found this virus. Now, to just put that into context, lockdowns will only work if you can isolate the virus and stop it from spreading. So if a few people have the virus and you are able to find them quickly before they spread to anyone else and isolate them, then you'll stop the spread. But once you get to a certain point where that pathogen has spread into community itself, locking down ain't going to stop the problem because you don't know where it is anymore. So the PCR test needed to be very, very specific for lockdowns to actually work. It's like having a bowl of white rice, and you got 2 black grains of rice in that bowl, and they are very quickly going to contaminate the rest. So the aim is to remove those 2 grains of rice before they contaminate the bowl. So you need good eyesight and you need good speed. Now with the PCR test, it's almost being blind. So our eyesight was the PCR test, and we'd never be able to find those 2 grains of rice with such a poor test. And of course, we were dependent on public politicians and social structures to isolate and quarantine people. But of course, we well aware of the ineffectiveness of those. With the travel restrictions itself, those as well required there to be an effective PCR test to determine clearly whether you have the virus or not, and that would not happen. And with the travel restrictions, I think it's vitally important to understand that this virus arose in Wuhan. With the finding of this virus in Wuhan, China shut all its borders. This virus never spread to another city in China. It stayed in Wuhan, but it spread to the rest of the world. I find it very strange that China managed to confine it to Wuhan, but left its international travel open and allowed it to spread to the rest of the world. If we just isolated China, it wouldn't have been in Italy a few weeks later. So that doesn't make sense that with travel restrictions, you have travel restrictions internally in your country, but you don't have external travel restrictions. Now, the vaccines were always touted as our savior, even before we proved that they were safe and effective. So that's something to look at. How did they know that it would be safe and effective to tout it as a savior? There was no evidence of this. And of course, we're using a new platform. So I guess there should have been a little bit of circumspection. But of course, that didn't happen. Then, of course, we roll out a vaccine in a phase 3 clinical trial to the global population. Now, that is something that can be very dangerous, especially with something untested. So I think caution was necessary. Now, with a phase 3 trial, good clinical practice dictates that every single person given this vaccine needs to be closely monitored and followed. Albeit also having done a full physical before giving the vaccine itself, so that we don't go back and say it was pre-existent without having examined the patient before. So phase 3 clinical trials supposed to have been done in a very controlled, well-ordered way, and we haven't seen that. Patients willy-nilly are given this vaccine. There is no doctor that actually examines them prior. There is no doctor that needs to authorize that they are fit enough to actually take the vaccine. It is being done by poorly trained staff at pharmacies and sports stadiums and the rest. That is not how a phase 3 trial is done. As to the adverse events reporting, adverse events should not be left to the patient to report. Sometimes the patient doesn't know what the adverse event that they're actually having an adverse event. So they should be followed up timeously, and all adverse events should be reported by the doctor itself. This is not happening. Now we got to phone in or write in to an adverse event reporting system to let the makers of the vaccine know that we're having an event. So it makes me wonder how a dead man's going to tell you he passed away. It's nonsensical. And with all the toxicities that we've seen with the vaccine, we would expect that our freedom of choice was protected, at the least. But of course, they mandated the vaccine. And the mandates drew my attention to a bigger agenda. Why would you mandate a vaccine that, first of all, is ineffective and proven to be ineffective? And why would you mandate a vaccine that is clearly toxic, if not deadly? So from the vaccine adverse events reporting system, we know that it is wholly underreported. So from the start of the vaccine campaign, I've been pushing for people to look at all-cause mortality. If we don't know what's in the vaccine, then we don't know what it can do. And so we shouldn't speculate. If you look at all-cause mortality and compare it year on year, you will see a trend. And if that trend shows an upward rise in cases or rise in deaths, then we got to be suspicious of what's new in our environment in that time. From the insurance industry, there's been across the board an increase of 40% in all-cause mortality that's being reported, and the timeline stretches back to the initiation of the vaccine campaign. This is all-cause mortality that has nothing to do with COVID deaths itself. Now, this rise in all-cause mortality should be of grave concern. A 40% increase in all-cause mortality is very high. Even during the greatest of afflictions to humanity, all-cause mortality has only gone up 10%. So the insurance industry uses that as a standard to gauge future payments. Now that they see a 40% increase, they're up in arms. And I think we need to look closely at them, because they are the ones that are going to force the research into why this increase in mortality. It's going to be between them and the morticians that are going to tell us the truth. As if the vaccines as they stand at this point in time are not ill-conceived enough, we're now at a point where we seem to want to dispense it to children. And children are not at risk of mortality and morbidity from COVID illness at all. The mortality and morbidity of COVID illness comes from a hyperimmune response to spike protein. Now, children use their innate immunity, and their immunity is pretty immature. This immunity of children is meant to allow them to learn and tolerate the environment they're expected to thrive in. And that's the purpose of a child's immunity. Now, as a protective adaptive mechanism, an immature child's immunity does not have the capacity for such an explosive, mature immune response that has caused all the mortality and morbidity of COVID. So children are not at risk at all. So why the need to vaccinate them? It makes no sense.
Dr. Chetty, unmute yourself.
Benjamin, where did I stop?
You just stop. You just stop.
As you just muted. Yes. Okay. So children are definitely not at risk of COVID and should not be offered this vaccine under any circumstances whatsoever. They will build natural immunity to this virus, and it will hold them in good stead in the future. So vaccinating children is definitely a very dangerous, almost reckless thing to do. Now, as a wrap-up, yes.
I think your paper must be touching the microphone.
Are you hearing scratching?
Yes, scratching sound from the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. As a wrap-up, from the perspective of the virus, we have a virus that causes very unusual illness, with both a very sudden acute phase to it and a prolonged phase to it where there's toxicity involved. As to the vaccine, we have an ineffective vaccine, if it could be called a vaccine at all. We've shown its toxicity to its host. There's new research that shows that via reverse transcriptase, it integrates into DNA. And of course, we now sit with it being mandated. So a toxin is a toxin. But if I force you to take it, it's considered a poisoning. The act is a poisoning. And so are we dealing with genocide? It's vitally important that humanity keeps this in mind. When you look at war and the outcomes of war, it seems that the outcomes of this war that we're in have been pre-planned. With war, it's always reset society. Now, with this vaccine, it seems to want to do the same. if you look at the vaccine itself and its effect on our social order, through the ages, people at the top of this pyramid have always sought to divide society, to keep society divided so that our collective strength cannot challenge them. And this division was based on many things, mostly race, religion, ethnicity, and those were the tools that they used to divide society. Taking South Africa as an example, during apartheid, white population was privileged and black population prejudiced. But you couldn't take a bad white man and change the color of his skin and take away his privilege. Neither could you take a good black man and change his color to white and give him privilege. But today, your privilege or prejudice will be based on a fake vaccine status. Now, I can take an unvaccinated, unprivileged person and vaccinate them and give them privilege. They now can fly and they now can go to whichever restaurant they want. And I can take a double vaccinated person who refuses a booster and classify them unvaccinated and take away their privilege. And I find it unscientific that we actually think we can unimmunize someone in this day and age. But that changes the dispensation of privilege and prejudice. Now, they want to bring out a digital vaccine passport. Any digital ID will be the enslavement of humanity. Now, why I say that, this is sold to us as a simple binary measure. You're either vaccinated or you're not. And they want to put it onto a cell phone. And of course, you'd have to scan a QR code to gain access to anything. Now, for those that are pro-vaccine, you'll be proud that you have an elevated status. So when you scan that QR code, you'll get a green tick, and you'll be proud of that green tick, and it will give you privilege to enter that restaurant. And of course, you'll have a false sense of security that everyone else in the restaurant has that same green tick, even though they can spread COVID to you. So you're privileged. But one day you're going to go to the same restaurant and your green ticket would have turned into a red cross. And when you inquire why, they're going to tell you that you should have taken a booster 2 weeks ago, and now you've been classified unvaccinated and you are now prejudiced. You've lost your privilege. Yes, you can go and take your booster and get your privilege back, but you are buying your privilege. But what people don't see coming is that one day that green tick is going to turn into a red cross. And when you inquire why, because you have taken your booster just a few days back, you're going to be told it's because you didn't pay your parking fine last week. And then you'll realize that Adam couldn't spit out that apple after he took a bite, and it will be too late. So it's sold to you as privilege, but you don't realize you're being enslaved. And the purpose of the QR code is to make that privilege location specific. So if you scan a QR code and you get a green tick, it allows you into that specific restaurant. It doesn't allow you into another. You got to go scan the code there too. So if the government feels that you are a problem, they can enforce your green tick in a circumference around where you live. And when you leave that area, it will turn into a red cross. And you wouldn't be able to avail any services, simply because you need a green tick and the privilege to be able to do those things. So the QR code is meant to limit your travel and freedoms. So in a way, this is a new way of dispensing privilege and prejudice, and a way that can be governed by the powers that be. So clearly, this is a means to enslavement, and any sort of digital ID that puts all our biodata onto one platform will allow that kind of enslavement. From a financial perspective, the world itself faces a financial collapse. In 2008, we nearly had a financial collapse. if you look at the structure of the world itself, 100 years ago, it was master and slave. And then we had the development of a middle class. And the middle class were those that worked independently, employed, entrepreneurs, that grew society, bridged the gap. And when we got strong enough, we fought for freedom, democracy. The problem we have is that when we got so-called democracy, we never held our masters accountable and redistributed the wealth. And neither did we change the systems that were in place that benefited a few at the expense of many. We tried over these years to tweak those systems to make them more equitable, but they were never built to serve the purpose. They were built to benefit a few. Now, over this time, it's the middle class that has become a problem for those in charge. Now, with the pandemic that we have, in 2008, we almost had a financial collapse. The world's economic system is a great pyramid scheme if you look at the stock exchange. I buy shares in your company and someone else buys shares in my company, and so the guy at the top got shares in all the companies. So in 2008, the market was flushed with cash. Money was printed and a catastrophe averted. But I think that this catastrophe was just postponed so that people could plan it a lot better. Now what we have from a financial perspective with this pandemic is there's a need to eliminate the middle class because we're the problem, we're the bridge. So if you look at the lockdowns, I couldn't go to a hairdressing salon and stand socially distanced outside to have a haircut because she's not on the stock exchange. But the local supermarket chain would allow 1,000 people in, no problem. So that doesn't make sense when you're trying to curb the spread of a virus. That seems to have more financial implications to it. So the aim is to remove the middle class. And the simplest way to do that would be to shut down the world's economy for a few years. It's the middle class that will struggle. And in this 2 years, we've seen the greatest transfer of wealth from the middle to the upper class ever in human history. So I think there's an agenda. This is meant to impoverish the middle class. It is meant to divide society, so we will have a controlled collapse of this pyramid where people will be impoverished and enslaved, but the people at the top maintain their power and gain wealth in what they do. So there's all these different agendas at play, all made possible by a virus and a vaccine. So I think we need to be very cognizant of what's happening around us, to be very well aware of decisions being taken by people in authority. And I think if humanity wants to get out of this conundrum we've been in for the past 100 years and ensure the survival of our children, then we need a great awakening, not a great reset. Humanity needs to come to realize that we're being manipulated. And of course, we've deferred our responsibility as parents, as members of societies, to authorities that now control us and decide our fate. So I think looking at the entire picture, the person that made the virus is the person that likely made the vaccine. And it was all pre-planned. The evidence for it might not be forthcoming, but the view of the big picture definitely tells a different story. So the people that are in charge need to be brought to book. Evidence needs to be collected. And I think that the only time we'll figure this out is if we catch people by the scruff of the neck and shake them up a little bit and get them to tell us the truth. Otherwise, we're going to be walking around in circles and probably end up enslaved. So I hope the powers that be, the lawyers out there, the researchers out there, all the specialists in their fields come together and work towards a common goal. And that goal should be clarity. clarifying what has just transpired to humanity. Thank you. I'll have questions if there are any.
You got to unmute yourself, Dr. Manimalar, please.
Unmute.
Okay, now can. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Shankara Chetty. That was very interesting indeed. Now, I've got some questions for you. So basically, you're telling us that this virus has got certain sequences, like the HIV sequence, the GP120, and it has got bacteriophage activity, which you typically do not see in viruses which thrive on eukaryotic cells. Would that be correct?
Yes, exactly. Viruses tend to be very specific in the kind of
either
host.
Eukaryotic or they are bacteriophage.
And as well, not necessarily just eukaryotic or prokaryotic, but as well, the receptors on the host itself are very specific, or the virus is very specific to the kind of receptor it'll bind to.
Okay.
So you find mammalian viruses tend to be mammalian. They tend not to cross species very easily, unless there's some mutation that makes that probable. So that's the reason I say that. That's the diversity of host brings suspicion.
So the diversity of host, that means it can infect both humans and bacteria. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that I'm going to put that question later to Dr. Koshy. The second question I want to ask you is about, you have said that you don't believe that the virus has been isolated yet, right? Yes. So there is a paper by Cayley in Australia in 2020, where they say that they have used the virus isolate to test ivermectin, right? So what did they use then? If you say that the virus has not been isolated, what did Cayley use?
It's probably they isolated it from a patient. Let's call it a pathogen. We can be talking about exosomes, toxic exosomes. It can be a viral particle, but it hasn't been completely isolated and sequenced. Now, when they use it to test against a drug itself, you're still not using the entire virus. So yeah, we haven't yet isolated the entire virus.
Okay, so you concur with the view that we haven't isolated it yet.
Yes, I think the problem there is that there's always a controversy between the germ theory and the terrain theory, and of course I think there's an overlap between the two, and so it's not one or the other. I think there's some overlap that's there. So you find people that look at the terrain theory will say there's no virus, but there's definitely something infectious in the air. From what I've seen with my patients, clearly there is something contagious that spreads in families and close contact. So we're definitely dealing with a contagious pathogen that spreads from person to person. This cannot be a poisoning, like poisoning a water supply. You don't see the distribution in an area where other areas are uninfected. And of course, that kind of poisoning is not transmissible from patient to patient. So definitely we're dealing with a transmissible pathogen. What that pathogen is up for grabs until we isolate it and actually look at exactly what the sequence is there.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing is the PCR test itself, because I remember going through these PCR tests, the test for COVID-19, and even the test itself is a EUA, because those PCR tests have not been clinically validated to get a full approval. What they have is actually a technical validation. It means bits and pieces of the PCR is put in and the test is reacted to that. It's not a fresh human, an in vivo human sample.
Yeah, I think we needed something very specific if we were going to institute isolations and lockdowns. We have to find the virus to do that. So you can't get a sequence from China that says, this looks a bit like the virus. And then we use that to make a test that says, this may be a bit like the virus. It's not specific. We're going to isolate people that are not infective, and we're going to be not isolating people that are infective. And so lockdowns and all those kind of things will be absolutely nonsensical. Look, from the perspective of China, I don't think that China is truly involved from a in the pandemic as people think it might be. I have my concerns about the US Department of Defense and the movement of the research to China in 2014, where there was a moratorium on research in the US. Funds were just transferred to China and the collaboration was taken up there. I think the Department of Defense has some questions to answer. When it comes to the Chinese government itself, I'm not sure their role in this. They are being very cautious. I think they understand the gravity of what's happening around them. So we got to be very careful about who gets instigated in this. The war in Ukraine, as we've seen, was dealing with bioweapon and bioweapon facilities as well. President Putin and the Chinese president have been pushing the UN for many years now to investigate the emergence of bioweapons facilities in the Ukraine, being funded by the US and NATO. And of course, the UN has not gone down that road. So when you have people talking about the next pandemic and it's going to be worse, obviously, I think Putin would be a bit concerned that it might be on his doorstep. And so the necessity to bomb those bioweapon facilities and invade Ukraine. So I think there's a huge picture at play. But the one common thread that seems to run through all this is the Department of Defense, the US Department of Defense, and the research that's gone on in that direction.
Okay. Prof. Koshy, Dr. Koshy, are you there? Can I ask you a question?
Yes, I am very much here.
Thanks.
Listening intently.
Okay, Doctor. See, I've got an issue with this word isolate. Can you please explain to us, are there multiple meanings to this word isolate? Are different people talking about slightly different things?
That's a very good question. It all started with the Koch postulates, where an infective microorganism is supposed to be isolated and then reintroduced into a healthy animal or whatever, and then it is again shown in terms of symptoms and then again re-isolated. That is the Koch postulates.
So what exactly does isolation mean?
That means it has to grow on a medium.
Okay.
The microorganism must be able to grow on a medium. That is what the Robert Koch postulates is all about.
Okay. So
you should be able to isolate it and culture it on a medium, on a pure medium.
Okay.
And then that same microorganism must be able to reinfect a healthy subject. And from that infected organism, you should be able to again re-isolate the same microorganism.
Okay, so this might mean different things to different people. Is that possible?
Well, what has happened over the years is, and this is where metagenomics came in, there is a lot of unculturable microorganisms in the environment. And so they resorted to the metagenomic tool. And especially when there is a whole diverse range of microorganisms in an ecosystem. It may be soil, it can be the gut, it could be the fecal, it's used in a gut microbiome study, where you cannot isolate every microorganism to study it because that will take a long time. So what they do is they do what we call as the metagenomic or shotgun technique, where you take the whole DNA and then try to identify by taking bits and pieces and trying to identify what these different bacteria encode for in terms of identity. You have muted yourself, Dr. Manimalar.
Dr. Manimalar, you have to unmute
Oh,
yourself.
there's something happening to the mute button.
Sorry, we have to mute all.
Okay. Right. Right. Prof, the other thing I wanted to ask you, you see, the point raised by Dr. Shankara Chetty to me seems very valid.
Yeah.
Wasn't it much easier just to use a protein as a vaccine rather than take the circuitous part of injecting an mRNA, and then that mRNA is going to produce an unknown quantity of spike protein and things like that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Shankara has raised a valid point. And if it is a spike protein, why not use the spike protein?
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, in vaccinology, they have all these different technologies. And why did they choose the mRNA? That remains to be answered.
Yes.
Why not like the Sinovac? The Sinovac is not based on the mRNA technology. Right? So herein lies the variation.
Yeah.
So there are different...
Sorry, Prof. We have
Yeah.
so many different platforms that we've been using over all these years. Live attenuated, heat-killed vaccines. We've got all this research in front of us. Why in this pandemic did we abandon science?
Yes.
We abandoned the science with vaccines. We call this a novel virus when we've got years of experience with viruses and understand what they do. We just threw everything out the window. Whereas if we were dealing with an emergency, we should have fallen back on what we know. And that would have given us the quick answers that we need. Now, 2 years down the line, there's bits and pieces when we talk of isolation of this virus. When you look at Koch's postulates, when you look at the ability of the virus to reproduce and reinfect, or the pathogen to reproduce and reinfect, there's bits and pieces of information out there that prove that there's something going on. Meaning that with the gene sequencing, we've been able to find different variants of the virus, all that kind of differences in the DNA. And as well with Carlos Brogner's work, he managed to take the supernatant out of a centrifuge infected sample of stool and put that supernatant onto a fresh, healthy stool, uninfected stool sample, and he proved an exponential growth and an exponential rise in titer of toxin. So there's these bits of information that show we're dealing with a pathogen that is reproducible, that can spread, that can cause infection, but in 2 years, we haven't been able to completely sequence it. And that's where the problem lies, in that we have these tools available to us, but for some reason, they're not being used. Or people that want to use them are being sidelined or not funded. We've had, actually just, you talk about vaccines. We had a doctor from, I think it was Venezuela, who used a Newcastle virus, an avian virus. They use it to vaccinate birds against certain viruses. And it's sprayed. And it's absolutely non-toxic to human beings. And they use that as the platform or vector to create a COVID vaccine that's intranasal. And it had great efficacy, great safety, gave mucosal immunity, but never got the funding and never got approval from the FDA. So when you look at the bodies in charge, why would you not authorize something safe? First of all, safe. We can talk about the efficacy later on, because as long as it's safe, we can work on the efficacy. But if it's effective and it's not safe, it doesn't matter. It's not safe. So why didn't we start with safety? With all the technology we have and all that we know, That would have been the ideal starting point, not a new unknown technology.
I'd like to add something here. Way back in the 80s, remember the Newcastle disease vaccine that was developed by UPM? And it got an award. It was a collaboration with the Australian Centre for International Agriculture Research. Now that was a vaccine which was given to, because until then, chickens had to be injected. This vaccine was developed and it could be introduced in the feed. So just elaborating what Dr. Shankara just mentioned about the Newcastle disease virus. So Newcastle disease virus vaccine, yes, that has been worked on before. So these technologies are all available. But having said that, there is textbook knowledge of mRNA, but I have not seen it applied before. It is textbook knowledge. It has been published in textbooks, but this is the first time Pfizer has used it in a big scale.
Actually, Moderna has been trying to develop an mRNA vaccine for influenza, I think since 2017 or 16. But even though influenza has got such a large number of patients, they'll have no problem running a clinical trial. But for some reason, they could never commercialize it. Then all of a sudden, for this COVID-19 vaccine, they were able to commercialize it within 6 months. See, so now the thing that the public, the question posed is, without an EUA, would these vaccines have really stood up to scrutiny? Suppose we want to scrutinize the vaccine the same way we would scrutinize it for full approval, would these vaccines have withstood scrutiny, given that they couldn't develop the influenza vaccine even after so many years? So yeah, that is the thing, that convoluted pathway to developing a vaccine when they could have easily just used a killed vaccine.
Attenuated vaccine.
Attenuated vaccine. Prof, can you tell us something about the new nasal spray vaccines?
Yeah, I think there is a company in India which is working on it, and I suppose they have already developed it where it is very effective. That's what I have found out. And it is in some stages of commercial development.
Yeah, I hope that we can get a vaccine like that also. Yes. One of the success stories of vaccination is actually the oral polio vaccine.
Yeah,
so it is just an attenuated vaccine which is given in the normal route, the same way that polio. Yeah, Dr. Shankara Chetty.
Dr. Manimalar, just to add to the conversation around vaccinations, in all the patients that I've seen, during the viral phase of the illness itself, they all showed, within a period of 5 days, signs of good improvement and recovery. So the fever went away, the body aches went away, they started to improve. That's a good sign of immunologic competence. So they had the ability to process this virus and have their immunity kill it. And so they showed signs of recovery. It was on the 8th day where they start those that were allergic or hypersensitive to spike protein developed a second phase. So the mortality and morbidity came from an overreaction of an immune response to which you were predisposed to. The virus was not really the problem. The virus was just a vector that exposed you to this toxin. So when I look on the broad scale and natural immunity, here in South Africa, we're sitting with about 97% natural immunity, of which we only have a 25% vaccination rate. Now, natural immunity should not have been discounted in the first place. It's the best vaccine we can give anyone. If we stopped all the mortality and morbidity, it would make the need for a rushed vaccine wholly unnecessary. And we could have taken the time to develop it properly, as long as people were not dying from this illness. Now, the curbing of early treatment and all the censorship around that has propagated and allowed the mortality and morbidity to continue. So I think that it's important to know that a vaccine, even at this point, is not the savior of this pandemic. Simply because there are hordes of people out there who have had this infection, have natural immunity, and new infections pose no risk to them at all. Their immunity is able to cope with it. Now, why do we want to go and vaccinate those people? And what we've seen is that with the current vaccine, it damages your innate immune response. And so people that are triple boosted and the such have damaged their immune response to such an extent that they can get reinfected with the same virus over and over again. So I think we've got to be very cautious about intervening where nature knows what it seems to be doing. This vaccine that we've put out has caused more harm to people than any benefit it could have in any measure at all. So I think we just got to be cautious. Yes, we want to develop a vaccine. We want to limit it to those at high risk. And remember, high risk needs to be clarified. It's the proportion of population that are susceptible to spike protein injuries. And those are the ones that we need to protect. But developing a mass vaccination to distribute across the globe, again, is going to pose challenges. And so I think we missed the boat. This is a conversation we should have had 2 years ago, and it would have made all the difference. But now we're at the tail end of things, and the dog's tail has stopped wagging, and now we're trying to figure out if it's dead. It's a bit late. It's a bit late, yeah. But I guess we're going to have to do what we're going to have to do.
Okay, yeah. So this has been a very interesting conversation, because I think it's one of the webinars where we are going deep into the scientific aspects of COVID-19. Yeah, so there are some questions from the audience, but some of it I just repeat. So let me just see if there's anything that we can. Yeah, and by the way, both of you have a huge fan following now. If you look at the audience comments in the chat box, you both are the new movie stars.
I don't wish willing to bail me out of jail.
I don't wish to.
Okay.
Just contributing my little bit for good science.
Exactly, Prof. Much appreciated. Okay. Okay, a lot of the questions are not really or have been answered. Yes, Prof. The PCR test. See, there seems to be some, what do you call it? That you cannot use the PCR test as a diagnostic test. Now, personally, I find that a bit odd, because you see, being histopathologist, when I look at a histopath slide, I see the granuloma there, so I know it's TB. But because the bacilli itself is very rare, we can't pick it up with our eyes. But when we send it for a PCR test, it's positive. So why is there this controversy that you cannot use a PCR test as a diagnostic test? I don't quite understand it myself. Do you have anything that you would like to share with us? Any peculiarities about the test?
Dr. Shankara, you want to go first or I go first?
Okay. Look, with the PCR test itself, it is not a diagnostic tool, in that it doesn't tell you whether the person's infectious, whether the person actually has that's the causation of the illness itself. Mm-hmm. So a PCR test should only be used as a confirmation of diagnosis, not as a diagnostic tool. So if you had a patient where you were very suspicious of COVID illness and you needed to clarify that, fair enough, you can do a PCR test like you explained with TB. You see a granuloma, you're suspicious it might be TB, well, you use it as a confirmation of that diagnosis. You don't use it to diagnose. Now, with using it as a confirmation of diagnosis itself, it's got to be very reliable. And the reliability of the PCR test is determined by its cycle threshold. So the lower the cycle threshold, the more specific it actually is. But we've seen that cycle thresholds over 25 cycles are very unreliable. And so when you do a PCR test, it's important to quote the cycle threshold so you know how positive it actually is. Now, they've set the cycle threshold with this, I think, about 40. So that's going to give us a whole range of false positives. So I've actually stopped doing PCR testing a long time ago. I find it absolutely unnecessary. I've had too many patients with typical symptoms of COVID test negative, and I've had patients absolutely asymptomatic test positive. And now with the Omicron variant, it seems that we're dealing with a different platform. The first three variants had very similar disease progression. With Omicron, something changed. And there's no evolutionary biology behind Omicron. So it might have been kept in a fridge for all this time, for all I know. But with Omicron itself, the PCR test has become even more unreliable. More and more, I'm getting patients with Omicron who are testing negative, but clearly have symptoms of Omicron. I think all this will be to no avail in the near future, simply because we don't test people with the flu to know which strain of flu they have. As long as we're confident that they will recover, there's no reason for us to go down that road. So more and more, the COVID illness is becoming milder and milder. So simply being able to have good clinical suspicion and treating the patient appropriately should suffice. So the PCR test itself is not a diagnostic tool. It's, I think, just there to report cases. I don't need to know how many people got the flu today. I need to know how many of them are going to die with it, and then I'll get off my seat and do something about it. So just counting cases is of no consequence to us. It should be that the PCR test has a limitation to the cycle threshold that we use. That should have been there from the start.
So basically, you're saying that the PCR test does fine as a confirmatory test, but not as a screening tool.
Yep, exactly.
The threshold cycles is critical, as Dr. Shankara said. Now, PCR was originally designed to extract DNA from any organism, even if it is tiny in amount. And with that tiny amount, you can magnify it, amplify it. That's the whole idea of having a PCR, and thereby you can detect the DNA. So that is why it is excellent for DNA fingerprinting. Yeah. So that is...
Prof, I think for people to understand, when we talk about cycle thresholds and the higher cycle threshold, you can find anything. I think a good example is like a TV screen. If you can take a corner of it and you're looking for something, but the more you amplify it, it gets more pixelated and more blurred, and you can find anything in that picture. So the more you amplify it, the more blurred it becomes, and the easier it is to find things that are not there.
Yeah, that explains the fundamental science. That explains the fundamental science.
Okay. Prof, so like now in Malaysia, we tend to use a cycle threshold of, I think, 40 to give you a negative diagnosis for PCR.
I'm not very sure because I am not in touch with the diagnostic lab, so I won't be able to comment on that.
Yeah, okay, no problem, Prof.
Yeah.
Right. So, we received a lot of questions for both of you, but the thing is, most of those questions are not really the focus of this particular webinar. So we will keep those questions, and then maybe when there's a next webinar with a different set of panelists, then we will pose the question to them, right? Because these panelists are very specific panelists who are very focused on the scientific aspects of bio weapons and the scientific aspects of COVID-19. So before that, okay, I've got a message to pass on from the organizers. Okay, apparently you can, after the session, you can play back this session quickly for 30 minutes or so. So those who want to do that can do. And as for the rest, for the public, those who have listened to the talk by both Dr. Shankara Chetty and Prof. Koshy, Now you can decide for yourselves as to what you think of as to whether bioterrorism is a real big possibility now for you, because really nobody has the a definitive answer. We all have our suspicions, and as Dr. Shankara Chetty has clearly outlined, some things really don't add up, right? And some things do look very odd, but at the end of the day, you make your decision. But whatever decision you make, if you have concerns, please bring it up with your member of parliament or with your state adun if you're a Malaysian, right? Because there's no point us talking here among ourselves and grumbling and don't do anything about it. Like what Dr. Shankara said, you need to catch hold of people who are in power and make them answerable. So please make your voices loud and clear with your parliamentarian and with your state adun, so that your fears are taken into account in the next general election. With that, I would like to thank both panelists, and I would like to thank all those who made today's webinar possible, especially Mr. and Mafim and PPIM. Thank you very much. We will keep all those questions which didn't fit into today's webinar, and we will try and pose it in the next webinar to the appropriate speakers. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure having a discussion with all of you.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Dr. Shankara Chetty and Prof. Koshy for this wonderful academic and educational program. I think we all had coming away with a lot of information and education from both of you. And as the program today suggests, is COVID, what next? So one question from me to both of you, what next?
Prof, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, as far as the future pandemic or epidemic is concerned, microorganisms definitely is a threat. Harmful microorganisms is a threat. The threat of mutation, either natural or artificial, is going to be a threat. We're going to live with this threat for a long time to come. And the best is to take the best precautions, in terms of what we can do as individuals, what we can do within our homes. I think that is important. Sanitation, sanitization, right? And precautions along those lines. I mean, there is only so much we can do. And the rest, we have to leave it at the mercy of the powers that be. But we hope we can influence and make a positive change here. That's all.
Dr. Shankara Chetty, there's one more question for you from Dr. Marivik Villa, who is a pulmonologist and critical care doctor in Florida. She says that she's lately been treating long haulers from vaccine. The striking presentation to me is the V8s, and the CD4 and CD8 counts are dropping significantly, some even worse than HIV/AIDS. And there's also horrendous reactivation of latent infection. I see more on those patients with 3 to 4 inoculations. Are you seeing this sort of picture in those patients of yours who have had their boosters and 4th doses? Is it something that we should be worried about?
Yes, I think it's very, very pertinent. The more vaccines you've taken, the more it's damaging your innate immune response. Mm-hmm. We suspected with the GP120 protein that this is going to happen. And if your immunity is suppressed, you're going to see a host of latent viruses reemerge. And of course, cancers in remission will resurface. I've seen that with my patients. I've had patients who were absolutely fine. A year ago, I did a male patient of mine a prostate check every year. He's been absolutely fine. He took the vaccine. 4 months later, came to see me with restriction of flow. When we tested, his PSA was close to 200 with stage 4 metastatic illness already. And so a lot of clinicians around the world are seeing that. Cancers that are explosive. We're seeing people in stage 3 and 4 whereas previously we caught them in stage 1 and we could actually do something about it. Now, I think what we need to remember with a vaccine is not like chocolate. More is not better. That's not how this works. So a vaccine is a prod of your immune system to get a reaction out of it. So when you take one vaccine, you might get a reaction, but it might not be the strong enough reaction you'd hoped for. And so you might need a booster for that. But if you keep doing this, your immunity is going to turn around and start ignoring the vaccine, simply because it will go from stimulation to just suppressing. It thinks it needs to tolerate this virus. And so you will have no natural immune response when you get the infection itself. So taking repeated boosters plays out in a myriad of ways. It would damage your natural response to the virus by suppressing your immunity and building tolerance, which is not what we want. It would suppress your immunity, and in doing so, bring out latent viruses that your innate immunity was suppressing and allow the reemergence of cancers in remission. That's not taking into consideration the specific toxicities of spike protein on its own. This is just the affectation to your immune response.
Of repeated vaccinations of the same type. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I think we will say good night for this session. Thank you all so much for being here, both our panelists and our viewers. We hope to see you again in a new webinar with a new moderator as well. So thank you very much. See you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
One final word, if I may. Those who missed the early 30-minute loop of videos that was put together by the organizing committee, please stay on. We'll play it again for those who joined us later. Thank you once again. Good night. Jamil,
Thank
over to
you.
Please share your
Good night.
screen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a message for the participants. Keep close to us. We'll keep on having these educational programs. So we'll be advising the mass or the population to be alert to what's going on. So these programs will be ongoing, and we probably have monthly programs that I hope you all will take part and come and join us and listen to all the speakers and the panelists that we'll have, experts in their area. Thank you.
And a final reminder, panelists, if you just go to the breakout room afterwards.
Karen, could you please, Ms. Karen Brackett, could you also move into the breakout room? Thank you.
How to move to the breakout room?
Can somebody save the chat so that we can have it?
Dr. Manimalar, you should see the request somewhere.
I don't see how I can get breakout rooms. Okay. Join breakout room.
Raj, have you saved the chat?
Thank you.
Let's look at this data. This is also a Qatari cohort. So now we are comparing apples to apples. First of all, on the left side here, this is the percent effectiveness. The horizontal axis or x-axis is number of months after an event, for example, an infection or vaccine. If somebody has 2-dose vaccines of Pfizer or Moderna, within 3 months, their efficacy for symptomatic COVID, the effectiveness goes below 10%. In case of Moderna, within 3 months, we're talking about Qatar, within 3 months, the effectiveness goes to a point where data is uncertain. It becomes insignificant. So you get the second dose, there is some protection. Within 3 months, you don't even know what protection is left. If you have Pfizer, then within 3 months, the protection drops down to 10%. And within another 3 months, the protection actually becomes negative. That is, unvaccinated are better protected during that time than the vaccinated. This is the 6th month, 7 month onwards. Now, if somebody gets a booster, that is the 3rd dose, then they go from wherever they are when they get the booster, 10% or minus 17%, wherever is the effectiveness. From there, they jump to about 60%. That's a big jump.
Understand?
But check this out, within 1 month,
Yeah. I'm struggling to
drops
get.
by 20% down to 40, and that trend continues, and within 2 to 3 months, they are back to 0. This is for the symptomatic COVID. This is not for the severe. So not a very great outcome. Follow me on this part here. This is the second dose. Here, 46.6% is the effectiveness after the second dose of Pfizer. 46.6% effectiveness after the second dose of Pfizer. Within 2 to 3 months, within 1 to 3 months actually. Then it starts declining, and within 3 months, it gets down to 8.8% effectiveness. It goes below 10%. And it continues to decline. So after the 6th month, it reaches minus 17.8. There should be a point here, 0.8. And if you get the booster, it jumps from here to 59.9% for 1 month. For 1 month. Then it drops down to 40.5%. And then it continues to drop down with a similar rate. I would suspect down to 10% again within 3 months. I would actually think it would be dropping faster than that. So good. What is the takeaway? If we are vaccinated, every 3 months our efficacy is almost down to nothing, or 0, 10, and we just have to keep having boosters every 3-4 months. Now, I'm going to compare the data to the unvaccinated study. So here, look at this black dot. This is the first infection with pre-Omicron variant. That infection incorporated from the day it occurred, it incorporated 88% or I think 84.5% effectiveness or protection. Compare that to vaccine after the second dose, 46.6%. And if you look at Moderna, that was even lower, 35%. And first Delta infection, 80% or more. Then actually protection started increasing. And by 7th month, protection went above 90%. And by 15th month, we are talking years now. With the vaccine, we were talking every 3 months. Now we are talking years. By 15th month, it dropped to 70%. We were talking about vaccine within 3 months going down to below 10. And then about 22 months, 50%. We're talking years, almost 2 years later. And almost 3 years later, this is of course a projection, 3 years later, the effectiveness went down to 10%.
Who will help us?
Stripped of all that I once knew, so many things I cannot do. Do you think of me at all? Trapped inside these walls, while you're there on center stage. Can you speak? Can you be brave? And think of me at all? Hear my desperate calls.
My career of 19 years, excuse me, that I took almost 14 years to train for, is likely over.
I was loyal to the fight. I lined up to do what's right. Do you think of me at all? Knowing I might fall. Now I'm burning black and blue. From all the hate I never knew. Do you think of me at all? When I didn't fit your goal. No more silence, please. Do not turn away. My life is worth the same. Hear my desperate cries. See my shattered dreams. You can make this right. Call my name and save me. I did what you asked me to. What if I was you? Would you silence you too?
I've been bedridden, unable to work, and unable to exercise for months.
Numbness, throat tightness, tachycardia, wild fluctuating blood pressures.
No more silence, please.
They said it was safe.
Do not turn away. My life is worth the same.
Now I go home to an empty house.
Hear my desperate cries. See my shattered dreams. You can make this right. Call my name and save me. I did what you asked me to. What if I was you? Would you silence you too?
Today, I am an unemployed paraplegic who's learning an entire new lifestyle.
I lost my ability to speak naturally. I've become unable to walk without a walker and never know if or when the tremors will come or go.
Who will help us?
I mean, as a regular guy, this stuff speaks to me. When you got doctors, head of hospitals, jumping off the roof. So are these censored stories useful to the public? So number one, what's in the vaccines? Number two, is this useful?
So because these injections are experimental and they're only being used under the EUA, we do not know the full list of ingredients that's in them. No one knows. We do know that there's supposed to be messenger RNA to manufacture spike protein. We found out that there's also messenger RNA in there to stop the body from stopping the body from removing the messenger RNA. We know that there's lipid nanoparticles in there. We know that there's polyethylene glycol in there. What else is in there? We don't know, and no one is holding them responsible for letting us know what is in the shots. The German doctor you mentioned found that it wasn't graphene oxide that was in it, it was graphene hydroxide. And the potential for graphene hydroxide, based on his scientific understanding, was that it breaks apart in the bloodstream and causes razor blade cuts into the endothelial lining of the cells.
There was a video released anonymously of dark field microscopy showing the graphene hydroxide nano razor blades, and they were zoomed in all the way onto the individual razor blades. They look exactly like razor blades.
Dr. Andreas Noack, the German doctor who claims to have found microscopic nano razors within a vaccine sample, has died just days after his most recent findings.
Now we're seeing people with increased clotting in their blood and strokes. We're seeing over 100 soccer players internationally who've already collapsed and died on the field. And he raised the suggestion that the action of the graphene hydroxide is what's causing these blood clots and these heart attacks and these strokes. Scientific method is, wow, over 100 of these soccer players have died suddenly, and many more athletes have died suddenly. And there's some concern that there might be some chemicals in this shot that are creating not only the cytokine storm, but blood clots and strokes and sudden death. The question that needs to be asked is there something or some things in this shot that could be contributing to the observations that we're seeing?
We listened, so we believed that this vaccine was the right thing to do. So please, trust us and listen to us when we tell you that we are continuing to suffer physically.
I deserve to be seen, heard, and believed.
Please, we need to be heard.
Please, let us be heard.
Please, people need to know what we're going through so we can get the help we need.
My wife deserved to be seen, heard, and believed.
We have a right to be heard. Please, there's so many of us that need help.
I'm about to have you meet and put faces to many of the real people who have been suffering after taking the COVID vaccine. We desperately need the medical community to recognize us and help us find a solution. Until this is recognized as a real problem, the medical community won't research this, and we will continue to suffer in silence without treatment. We're not anti-vax. On the contrary, we all tried to do our part to help stop the pandemic by getting this vaccine. So let me introduce many of them to you, all of them weeks to months out from the vaccine, and still being affected by these symptoms.
Johnson & Johnson, New Jersey. I want to be heard.
Pfizer, Ohio. We need to be heard.
Johnson & Johnson, Tennessee.
Pfizer, Illinois.
Moderna, Texas.
I live in Puyallup, Washington. I am suffering, and I want to be heard.
Pfizer, Florida. I want to be heard.
We need to be heard.
Please, let us be heard.
I had the Moderna vaccine in Wisconsin.
Pfizer, Indiana.
Pfizer, Florida.
I want to be heard.
Moderna, Minneapolis.
Moderna, New York. I need to be heard.
Pfizer, Louisiana.
Pfizer, Illinois.
I need help. I want help, and I want to be heard.
Pfizer, Maryland.
Pfizer trial for 12 to 15-year-olds, Ohio.
We need help.
We need to be heard.
Johnson & Johnson, California. Please, we desperately need to be heard.
I need help. And I need to be heard.
We need to be heard.
Moderna, Kansas.
Moderna, Virginia.
I received the Moderna vaccine on March 11th, and my life hasn't been the same since.
Pfizer, Texas.
Pfizer, Virginia.
Moderna, Oregon. I want to be heard.
Hear us.
I am now suffering, and I want to be heard.
We need to be heard. Pfizer, California.
Michigan, Moderna. We need to be heard.
AstraZeneca, clinical trial in the United States. Utah. Please, we need help.
I need to be heard.
Pfizer, Arizona.
Moderna, California.
Moderna, New Jersey.
I deserve to be seen, heard, and believed.
Please, we need to be heard.
Please, let us be heard.
Please, people need to know what we're going through so we can get the help we need.
My wife deserved to be seen, heard, and believed.
We have a right to be heard. Please, there's so many of us that need help.
Pfizer, Berea, California.
Moderna, Connecticut. Arizona, Johnson & Johnson.
Moderna, New Hampshire. We want to be heard.
I want to be heard.
We listened, so we believed that this vaccine was the right thing to do. So please, trust us and listen to us when we tell you that we are continuing to suffer physically.
I'm speaking on behalf of my 17-year-old daughter. Pfizer, New York. We need help. We need to be heard.
I am afraid to be shown due to the negative consequences some of my fellow sufferers have faced for speaking out, but I need help and we desperately need the medical community to hear us.
I had the Pfizer vaccine and I have been suffering now for almost 3 months.
The COVID-19 vaccine has not been proven safe and effective. It's a new technology and it's been tested on a few thousands of people in a few months. Please do your own research. This is not a real medical pandemic.
This pandemic is not a real medical pandemic. The COVID-19 vaccine is not proven safe or effective because there has not been enough time. In addition, there is not a clear definition of any new disease for which it can be tested against. There has not been a virus that has been purified or shown to be the cause of an illness. Thus, there is no target for a vaccine.
The corona vaccine is not proven safe or effective. There is no medical emergency. It is a fake pandemic. The coronavirus is in terms of harmfulness, mortality, and transmissibility comparable to a seasonal flu.
And I'd like to say that the new COVID-19 vaccine is not safe and that there is no global medical pandemic. For almost 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has been trying to develop corona vaccines, but never managed, because they saw in the animal trials that there were serious side effects, autoimmune disorders, when the animal was exposed to a new wild-type virus. This means that we humans will be the guinea pigs.
Do not take this vaccine. This vaccine is dangerous. This pandemic is a fraud.
The COVID-19 vaccines are not proven to be safe or effective. We believe that it is reckless and unnecessary to roll out these essentially experimental vaccines that are using a completely new mRNA technology to millions of people, when there is only limited short-term safety data, no evidence that they will prevent transmission of the virus, and no long-term safety data.
We know that we can treat the symptoms of COVID-19 very successfully with vitamins D, C, and zinc, and with very safe medicines. And also, a vaccine is then also not necessary, but that in the safety studies, there was significant adverse events and death in the animals that were used in these studies over the past 20 years.
We believe that there has been an overestimation of the public health risk from SARS-CoV-2 due to misrepresentation of data and inappropriate use of the PCR test.
It was all orchestrated to make you fearful enough to take the vaccine. This vaccine is just not proven safe. It has been developed too quickly. We have no idea what the long-term effects will be. It needs much more investigation.
This is not a real medical pandemic the world is enduring at this time. The vaccine has not been proven safe or effective, and I will not be taking and or recommending it.
The COVID-19 vaccine is not proven safe nor effective. And I think it's unacceptable that all liabilities have been waived for the companies that are producing it. If pharma doesn't take responsibility for the products they make, how can they expect doctors to inject them to their patients without doubt of doing harm?
And I just want to remind people that we have to remember that health does not come from the injection of toxins into our bodies.
I am here to tell you that I will not take the COVID-19 vaccine, and I will not recommend the COVID-19 vaccine for any of my patients. This vaccine is experimental on the human race because they are proposing to use modified messenger RNA or modified DNA, synthetic to the human body. This is the first time ever this will ever be launched on the human race. We don't know what could happen to us. In addition, they're proposing to use nanolipid technology or nanotechnology on the human race as well. There are so many different awful things that can happen to us, and we need to investigate this before we go forward. This is my alarm call to the world.
And I've treated many vaccine-damaged children. Due to the lack of proper testing and the spurious conditions surrounding the alleged pandemic, I would highly caution anyone considering taking the COVID-19 vaccine.
Denna så kallade covid-pandemi är inte en riktig pandemi. Detta är ett globalt angrepp mot våra mänskliga rättigheter, vår frihet och våra samhällen. Man måste vara spritt galen för att acceptera ett otestat experimentellt vaccin som kommer från en kriminell tillverkare som rusar igenom säkerhetsfasen och profiterar enormt genom att pressa folk att ta det.
Will you trust GMO, pharmaceutical, and 5G subsidizing eugenicist technocrats with your health? The COVID-19 vaccine is not proven safe or effective. This is not a real medical pandemic.
Know that when they develop this, it's under the umbrella of the 2005 PrEP Act. They have complete liability protection. You can't sue them and you have no recourse if this vaccine harms you. They have been trying to develop a coronavirus vaccine since 2002, since we had SARS. And every animal study that they've done, particularly the ferret study, which the ferret's immune system most mimics the human adult immune system. Ferret studies, rabbits, and rat studies, all the animals ended up with a paradoxical immune response in which the antibody levels that were very high actually accelerated the infection, made it much worse, and allowed the pieces of the virus to go inside of the cell and be incorporated into the DNA of the recipient of that vaccine by a process called transduction. That transduction irreversibly puts that snip of virus into your DNA and transforms your cells.
We want to alert you to the fact that the current COVID vaccines are an experimental product based on the injection of genetic material into our cells. And the risk of using these new technologies on humans and the environment are unknown. Well, they could have irreversible consequences. In April, the Pandemic Accelerator Act of the European Union allowed vaccine producers to have a free pass for safety. And on July 15, the European Parliament agreed to remove the need of risk evaluation. It is extremely important to understand that the current COVID vaccines are not proven safe.
I have to shout out that this is not a real medical pandemic, and the COVID-19 vaccine is not proven to be safe or effective. I agree with the British Medical Journal that the testing is not done honestly. The claimed 90% effect is really only 0.2% if you study the results. I wonder, why did Gates and his conspiracy terrorists spend billions to develop vaccines that can sterilize men, women, and even their unborn children?
Uniform and forceful measures, medical measures, are unethical and cannot be implemented on a defenseless population, neither as tests nor as vaccines. Treatment or vaccine can only implement it in an ethical and legal way, based on an individual medical consideration, well-informed patient consent, and clinical evidence of harmlessness beyond doubt.
And there is no pandemic, and the vaccine is neither safe nor effective. And to give an untested vaccine to entire humanity and use them as guinea pigs is complete madness and nothing else. And we must stop it now. And then there's only side effects and risks and costs. And that's a waste of money and waste of human life.
Do I believe there is a pandemic? Absolutely not. There's no evidence of that. Do I believe that COVID-19 exists? Absolutely not. It has never been proven. Do I believe that the population need this new COVID-19 dangerous vaccine that's not had the safety trials done and it hasn't ever been done before? Absolutely not. No one needs it. Do I believe that our government should be arrested for possibly genocide? Absolutely.
This idea that these vaccines are effective is false.
How can you form an opinion if you're being denied the facts?
We have journalist friends who spend all their time writing articles to downplay the side effects. Maybe they are in collusion with people who give them instructions.
And simply being fed the hearsay.
Coton says there are many pieces of data that raise questions regarding the efficacy of the vaccines.
I know a bit about PCR. I'm talking as a pathologist now. The PCR test creates over 95% false positives in perfectly well people.
Whatever the positive tests say with this PCR test, which we know to be unscientific and be used at 45 thresholds, which makes these positive tests false positives. We know this, and we also know that 147 people died in this county in the month of April. So let's go to May. How many people died in May? Ms. Wilma was talking about how all these people are dying. 54. We had 54 deaths in the county of San Diego. I don't care about the positives because obviously the PCR test is bunk and we know that. So what I've done is taken that information which you've provided to ensure that I'm an informed citizen and I know when you're lying. So let's go back to the deaths because that's hard evidence that we can use. In the month of June, how many deaths did we have, Nathan Fletcher? 80. How many residents are in this county? 3.3 million residents in this county, and we're using propaganda that Wilma Wooten is using from the PCR test that we know that has been tested to be bunk because we've had 80 people die in this county.
And it's that drives the graphs in the morning paper where the false positives are called cases, which are no such thing. They're as well as you lot.
How many rights are we going to take away before we look at the facts? We know what you're trying to do. There are good supervisors up here that are trying to fight for freedom like the Constitution, but where are the rest of you? Why are you silencing people and using this jargon to scare us into submission? When are you going to speak the truth, Wilma?
The second driver of fear is the brutal silencing of the truth. From the three sources that you would normally rely upon to form your own independent judgment. The media, the mainstream media, they're lying to you as well every single night on the television. Social media is suppressing the truth. It can only get out under alternative media. And how many people listen to that? No, you're being lied to and you're being denied the truth. And I'll include in that group physicians, particularly MDs, who by their cowardly silence have decided to put income ahead of ethics. The ethics. The ethics we physicians are supposed to hold dear. First, do no harm, and informed consent, both being trampled on by our government. Fear, in turn, has been the excuse for politicians and the unelected minions underneath them to enforce ridiculously arbitrary mandates that have no consensus for any effectiveness in the medical literature. Do I have to repeat that? No evidence for effectiveness. None, none, none.
It is said that the vaccine protects against severe disease, but we see examples of excess mortality in countries like Australia. It does not stop severe cases.
To those of you making the decisions, what are you doing and why? What is really behind this? Why are you trying so hard to put this in people? We've never seen such an unprecedented marketing effort, collusion, coercion, duress, and absolute forcing of people to do something that they do not want to do. It's egregious, and someone has to step up and say no more.
Everyone says the vaccines are safe and effective.
But what everyone says does not change our reality.
I got the COVID vaccine because I'm vulnerable and my doctor told me to.
I got the vaccine to do the right thing.
I got the vaccine to make sure that my dad wouldn't get sick.
I got the COVID vaccine because my husband kept getting exposed to COVID at work.
I got the vaccine to protect my health.
I got the vaccine to protect my friends, my family, and my patients.
I received the vaccine to help protect my patients.
I got the vaccine to be able to travel.
I got the vaccine to protect my dad and my husband.
I got my vaccine because I wanted to help protect people and I wanted life to go back to normal.
But now I'm injured. And then after I was sick, I was told I don't know what to do by doctors.
My physician told me the vaccine couldn't do this to me and that I was healthy.
My doctor said the second jab could kill me, but he later tried to blame something else.
My doctor said that my symptoms could not have come from the vaccine.
My doctor doesn't know what to do.
My doctor said it's kind of like we're all guinea pigs because this is all so new. We don't really know how to deal with these reactions that we're seeing.
I've been told not to share my story because it scares people.
I have been told that I should have known better than to get the vaccine, or I told you not to get the vaccine.
My friends tell me I got mine and I'm just fine.
I've had many people tell me that my injury is not from the vaccine.
My family told me that I was just stressed and anxious.
I had a friend tell me, well, I guess you're just one of the unlucky ones because I was fine.
Someone close to me told me that I should be silent for the greater good.
I have been bullied. I've had death threats. I've been made fun of.
I have been injured now for 10 months.
5 months.
For 6 months.
11 months.
11 months.
For 11 months.
11 months.
12 months.
13 months.
Nearly 4 months now. For 7 months.
For 12 months.
13 months.
I've now been injured for 13 months. No one knows how to help us.
No one wants to believe us.
No one knows how to help.
Nobody is researching this and nobody wants to hear about it.
No one is able to give me answers or solutions.
I want to listen to the fact that my injuries are from the vaccine.
No one knows how to help.
Nobody wants to help.
No one wants to face the reality that this is really happening.
No one is researching this.
No one is doing any extra work to try to figure this out. I feel totally on my own.
I've been banned on social media for spreading misinformation. I'm not misinformation.
I tried to share my experience and I got warnings for spreading misinformation.
And TikTok took down my whole story, saying that it was in violation of their rules for just saying what happened to me.
When I posted about my injury on social media, I got banned from certain features on the app.
Because our stories are labeled as misinformation. My story is not misinformation.
My support group is being silenced and threatened to be shut down.
I shared my experience on social media, and I was warned that it violated community standards and that I would be blocked. My personal story is real. I'm not misinformation.
My doctor reported my injury to VAERS 5 months ago, but I still haven't heard back.
I reported it to the yellow card scheme and my doctor and never heard back.
8 doctors refused to report my injury to VAERS.
My side effects were reported to VAERS. I have not heard anything from anyone.
I reported my injury to VAERS. They put it in incorrectly and refused to correct it.
They don't respond. They've just left me out here with no direction, nowhere to go. There's no response. All I get from VAERS and CDC is silence.
Everyone says it's rare.
Everyone says what I'm experiencing is rare.
Everyone says they know lots of people who are fine after their vaccine.
Everyone says that the vaccines are safe.
Everyone says that the side effects from the vaccine are minor and only last for a few days.
Everyone says the vaccines are safe and effective.
Everyone says, I know lots of people who have had it and they're fine.
But what everyone says
does not change our reality
and does not help us.
We are not here to debate the vaccine program.
Stop labeling us.
We're from all walks of life, just like you. I am a mother. I am a friend.
Marginalized and silenced. We did our part.
We are real.
We have been abandoned.
We are not rare.
We are real, not rare.
Help us.
Research us.
See us. Hear us.
Believe us.
What's in the vaccine? The so-called vaccine. What's in the experimental injection? And is it something that we need to be extremely concerned about? You're going to find out some information that will shock you today. So Dr. Young, thank you for joining us. Tell us, in your experience now, in your studies, what have you found out is contained in these experimental vaccines. What we're looking at right now is the graphene oxide tubule in the red blood cells that are coagulated. And this is from
okay. This is using optical microscopy. They're called graphene ribbons,
right,
or tubes. And if you're looking at the picture, I think you're looking at, you're seeing a collection of cells around the tip of that tube. Okay, that collection is an electromagnetic attraction of the blood to the graphene iron oxide, literally causing pathological blood coagulation that can lead to oxygen deprivation, that can lead to hypercapnia, can lead to suffocation or pulmonary embolisms. This clotting is very concerning, and this is one of the symptoms of graphene oxide and iron oxide causing the very clots that are causing this oxygen deprivation, that's causing this dry cough, that's causing the buildup of carbon dioxide and other waste that then leads to the body coughing, to the body inducing a fever in order to open up the pores of the skin to literally eliminate the acidic, toxic, metabolic, or respiratory waste. If it were not so, if the body didn't induce a fever, if the body couldn't then open the pores of the skin and release these toxins, you would literally suffocate from the inside out. And there is no treatment that can be given through respiration. The ventilation just compounds the problem. You have to deal with it, the pathological blood coagulation at the cellular level, and you have to neutralize the graphene iron oxide. Or, you know, here again, this will continue to appear as this material will interact with magnetic fields, specifically 5G, and cause and literally amplify this coagulation that could lead to suffocation and death.
So you're telling me, doctor, if a person has this graphene oxide in their body, somebody could turn the 5G on, or if he's near 5G, which are microwaves or electromagnetic fields, the graphene oxide in a person's body that has been injected is now a receiver of those electromagnetic waves and the microwaves. They're attracted and they're attracted to the graphene oxide in the body.
Yeah, it receives. Yeah, it's a biosensor.
And so then it turns and it heats those up, and it can. And if you turned up the microwave or the electronic magnetic frequency up high enough, you could do what you do in a microwave. If you covered a potato with aluminum foil and you put it in the microwave, it starts to explode. And
yeah, so this is the problem. But as the heat goes up, this is when the contents of parasites, like the Trypanosoma parasite, can start replicating itself and producing.
Okay, before we talk about that, let me hit a couple more slides. We're going to come to the parasite. It's the dry blood analysis of the normal red blood cell or normal blood, and you're looking at red blood cells, and then you're looking at abnormal with the white little circular spheres in it. Tell us about this slide, doctor.
Yeah. So when you're taking a drop of blood from the vascular fluids, it will naturally clot and produce what is called a protein. The protein's called fibrinogen, and it cross-links, forming fibrin nets. That is a normal clot. So what you're seeing is you're seeing thousands and thousands of red blood cells that are being held together by a protein, which is normal. But what happens, as is in an abnormal clot that you're looking to the right, is as cells begin to break down because of contributing factors of chemical poisoning and radiation poisoning, which is what the Latin means in corona. Corona in Latin means radiation. virus in Latin means poison, radiation poisoning. Cells start breaking down, and out of that breakdown, proteins are released, forming these pools of white. They're called polymerized protein pools, and you're literally seeing them in the abnormal picture, which indicates an abnormal clot and a condition of cell membrane breakdown, genetic breakdown,
caused by
graphene
graphene oxide.
Condition.
Caused by graphene oxide.
Caused by chemical and radiation poisoning that's amplified by the graphene iron oxide.
Okay, let's look at the next one. You have a microscopy of the liquid in the injection. And so we're looking at the flecks in this. This was literally the liquid you got from the vials of the so-called experimental vaccine. And this was a Pfizer vial. So what are we looking at? We're seeing these non-uniform little flecks in there. What is that we're looking at?
Yeah, that's the aqueous fraction from the Pfizer, and we did this for Moderna and AstraZeneca and the Janssen so-called vaccines. They all contained these little graphene specks, these nanoparticulates, using optical microscopy at 1,200 times. We can literally see these specks of graphene, but we can also analyze them as well as their elemental signature. So these are the reduced graphene oxide that were found in the inoculations that are being given without notice, without disclosure.
And without any disclosure or informed consent. Nobody. In fact, they even lie about it. They say we don't have any graphene oxide. And Dr. Young, you have shown through your electron microscopy that indeed there is graphene in there, reduced graphene oxide. Now you've also, let me ask you a question. Somebody mentioned parasites. Are there parasites? Are there parasites in these experimental COVID injections?
Well, I'm not the only one that's finding this, but we're finding everything. Yeah, so in identifying these parasites, you can use optical microscopy. You can also use electron microscopy. So what I identified was a Trypanosoma cruzi parasite, which has several different variants, and they're all lethal. And they are the main cause of immune deficiency, acquired immune deficiency, are parasite related. This is why ivermectin works when it's being prescribed. This is why hydroxychloroquine works, because it's dealing with these parasites that are literally feeding on your life force and literally then excreting waste products into the blood that are going into the interstitial fluid. This is a optical microscopy using phase contrast microscopy, showing using a stain, a violet stain, to identify a specific parasite. And in this case, what we're looking at is the Trypanosoma parasite. And these things are being found in over 90% of those who are now exposed to these things either through the air, through aerosol, or through other contact, through food. We're finding this in water. We're finding these in food. We're finding these in vaccines. We're finding them in aerosols. They're basically in everything. And of course, they activate at higher temperatures. So in order to not activate them, this is why these companies are refrigerating these to keep them in a dormant state before then it's injected into the body for proliferation.
Why would they be putting Trypanosoma parasites in a vaccine? What reason?
You know, I can't think of any reason, because yes, it will activate immunity. Yes, it will activate the neutrophils. Yes, it will activate the lymphocytes. But those are only activated in relation to break down products of your own body cells. Dealing with parasites have to be dealt totally different. The immune system is totally inept to deal with these parasites. you have to take other measures, anti-parasiticals, that you can talk to your doctor about that may be helpful to this specific parasite.
Let's go to
other parasites. Yeah.
Let's go to slide number. Let's see. It's the next photo, if you would, and I think it's number 8. I'm sorry, it's going to be number. Let's look at number 9. We got that. And this is the one with the white blood cell that's trying to engulf the graphene oxide and being poisoned. So it's with the blue material there. Tell us what we're looking at there.
Yeah, that's using fluorescence. What you're doing is you're highlighting and amplifying, or through contrast, you're able to see the GO, which is the graphene oxide.
And that's the blue. That's the fluorescent.
You can actually see the black. You see the
Right.
GO to the
Right.
right. You see that
Oh, I
black
see.
area.
Right.
That's all graphene. And then you see this outline of green. That's a neutrophil. They're picking that graphene up and literally sacrificing life to clear this out of the. And this is very, very difficult. So both the NET stands for neutrophils that are
Blood cell,
engulfing
folks.
the graphene oxide, and of course this is taking out. Now, based upon information that I have in our own testing and that of others, what we are seeing that the first inoculation takes out 50% of these cells. This makes up 2/3 of your white count. The second inoculation takes out 25%, and the third one, which is the booster, there is no more immunity. It takes out 100% of the capacity or capability. I don't want you to be, even though this sounds, horrific, I want you to know that the neutrophils deal with the effects of cellular breakdown, that the lymphocytes, CD4s and 8s, deal with releasing reduced oxygen to neutralize the waste or the breakdown products. What deals with true immunity is the stomach, which produces a compound called sodium bicarbonate. That is what is released into the blood and into the interstitium to literally neutralize and support. It's on the main front. The second part of immunity is the red cells that absorb this into its hemoglobin, and literally these cells turn black from it. They're called
Okay, Doc, let's go
antibodies.
to the last slide, number 11, and this is about the 5G and how it's going to interconnect with individuals. Maybe this will pop on. This is the woman running. Again, there we have it. She's running, and she has graphene oxide, and you can see the 5G tower connecting to her. She's a receiver. She's receiving the signals. That can make her sick. That could kill her if the electromagnetic field is strong enough, or it can control her behavior. This has been a shocking report you've given us, Dr. Young. So the graphene oxide is a one-two punch. We've got the spike protein that I was concerned that's causing all the problems, and now I find out that we have graphene oxide in the injection.
Yeah,
and even
with aluminum, with iron oxide.
So this is a disruptive element in the body, and it's a toxic. And why would you put a toxin in your body? Not only is it a toxin, the lipid capsule it's in is polyethylene glycol. My gosh, that's toxic. You go read about it. It should never be, according to the MSDS Material Safety Data Sheet, this material should never be given to humans, ever. And yet we have that as part of the injection. Graphene oxide should not be injected in humans. So somebody's got an agenda they don't want us to know about when they're denying they have graphene oxide, and we have it proven not only from Dr. Young. Dr. Young is substantiate what other scientists in other parts of the world have already documented.
Conclusion, there is no SARS-CoV-2, hence there's no COVID-19, hence there's no variants, there's no Gamma, no Delta, no Omicron, and there's certainly no damn monkeypox. Monkeypox is essentially a side effect of the jabs, folks. There ain't no new virus. If you've been injected with with any of the Pfizer or Moderna or whatever, Johnson & Johnson, any of those jabs, you get monkeypox. Essentially, you're detoxifying from your skin. And they're calling it a new virus. So it's all nonsense. You have to do something called causation studies. Remember I said that you have to prove that a virus causes a particular disease, so you have to show that this causes this. And the gold standard of that causation, it's called the Koch's postulates. There are 4 Koch's postulates. And you have to meet every single of those 4 points, those 4 Koch's postulates. And they are as follows. So it says the microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. Essentially, you have to find the virus or bacteria in a bunch of sick people, but you should not be able to find it in healthy people, okay? Number 2, the microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and grown in pure culture. And I will describe to you very quickly what that correct scientific methodology of isolation is. And here we go. Again, we take the lung fluid from a patient who has, tested positive through the bogus PCR test or whatever, coughing or whatever. And you take that lung fluid, you don't add anything. You just take the lung fluid by itself and you filter it through something like a coffee filter, but it's not a coffee filter. It's actually a virus filter. It's very, 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 very